Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Literary as Feck, where myself, Nick, and himself,
Pumpin' Joe Frost.
yep, we talk about books and all that stuff. This week it's my choice, and so I initially chose what turned out to be a 46-page long essay. So not in fact a book at all, which I wanted to read because I'd been meaning to read it since I was a callow young youth. That's Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, which famously gave their name to the band The Who. And so Clive said to me, that's only like 46 pages, Nick. And I was like, well, that sounds great. I can probably get that read in 2 weeks. But anyway, Clive recommended we also pair it with Thomas DeQuincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which is a bit longer, but I wasn't inordinately that much longer in a way.
But I couldn't let Nick get away with, getting to read something slim, easy to digest.
Right. That
simply
shy Irish bastard.
Yeah, exactly. Because he'd only be off if I didn't chain him to the desk reading, he'd be off. I don't know,
gallivanting in the fields,
putting coal in the bathtub.
As you do.
Tattooing young children's faces with racial epithets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, don't think that was on the cards. But anyway, so I figure we'll do them in chronological order. We'll start with DeQuincey's, 1821, Confessions of an Opium Eater, and then jump to 1957 or whenever it is that Aldous Huxley takes a big dose of mescaline and contemplates his own trouser pleats for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, Confessions of an Opium Eater. It's considered to be like the first, I guess, tell-all drug expose, right? The first.
Right. Which is a kind of genre or subgenre that you're a huge fan of. I know. You like?
Well, I am. Yeah, I mean,
addiction memoirs, don't you?
For wanting to read this was, yeah. I mean, I've read quite a few books by junkies or about being a junkie, and so including Junkie by William S. Burroughs. One thing that I've really seen like a consistent thing is they're all lizard people, right? Like they're all like reptilian fucking dudes, like including DeQuincey, just like so selfish, so completely like whatever, fuck everyone else. I am going to just go down this hole of self-pleasure as far as I can go until I'm nearly dead. And it's funny, like there's a lot of, I felt there was quite a bit of self-justification at the beginning of this about like how I'm a very smart fellow, and also an enjoyable and shocking amount of racism as the book goes on towards anyone who isn't an English man, basically.
Right.
I wasn't expecting it to suddenly take all of these left turns into like, so all of his drug-fueled fears seem to be around, a great replacement theory and like hordes of Asiatics. Like that was some weird shit, but we'll get to it.
Well, it was interesting when some of the anti-Semitism stuff pops up as well, but it's very weirdly presented, like almost as if there was something slightly self-parodic about it at a certain point. Like he was always making fun of this paranoia of Jewry or something, but also at the same time
participating in it somewhat.
Yeah, but it was odd. I suppose it's one of the elements that probably would have made more sense when it was new, right? Because you would have understood all the contemporaneous kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, anyway. And then the same for the Asiatics. I mean, Fu Manchu would have been literally active at that time, so you would have been concerned about him throwing scorpions in your window and so on.
Well, it's funny that yellow peril thing as well comes around like almost exactly 100 years later again, right? It kind of returns, and you get all those, those Fu Manchu like movies from the 30s, and stuff. And oddly enough, some of that plays. You didn't get a chance to watch the film adaptation, right?
No, so I'm interested when we talk about the book here. Interested for you to. I think I will.
I didn't get back to rewatching it, so I don't have that much to say about it. But just worth saying that there is this film adaptation from 1962 starring Vincent Price by Albert Zugsmith, which I remember being really, really quite interesting. And but because the book is so, it doesn't really lend itself necessarily for adaptation. So they just
because it's not really a narrative.
No, so they totally made up a new kind of story set in this weird kind of almost like a cross between like an old Wild West town and like Victorian London or something, and there's lots of white slave trade stuff and Fu Manchu type stuff. But it's a very entertaining, very, very weird. It's probably one of the strangest films Vincent Price ever made, I think. It must have been seemed really weird in 1962, but yeah, if you ever get a chance to watch it, you should check it out because it's worth it.
Will do. It sounds like it may be more interesting in some ways than the book.
The book, yeah. To be honest, yeah. Let's not kid ourselves as we go into this. This isn't exactly the rollicking read I was hoping for, and I'm glad. Not that I want to deprive you of joy in your life, but I'm glad we're kind of on the same page because. Did you feel every now and again that were there certain because we should mention the main difference between this and Huxley, of course, is this is written in a highly kind of poetic literary style, right? Did you find that occasionally, every now and again, for a few passages, it did actually click in place and work for you? Because every now and again, there was little bits like random. There's like this bit where he goes on a train journey and he's sharing a berth or something. That bit I really liked for some reason. Just transported me. Like I thought, oh, I want to be on this cross-country train. I don't know why, but he really could whisk up some nice imagery every now and again. And then I just kind of got lost, and I found after a few pages, oh, I've just been looking at this rather than reading it. Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah. It kind of held me at bay. And only occasionally, let me in.
What do you think that is? Do you think it's a language thing, or?
Yeah, I think so. I just felt like this was somebody who felt like, on the one hand, sets up this thing of like, I'm gonna like give you a no holds bar look into the degradation that like drugs can lead you to, and and I'm not gonna spare my own. But also like, but this is not a prurient thing. I'm not doing this for shock value. This is an education to mankind. People need to know what it is to be addicted to opium, and and then immediately starts like backtracking and self-justifying and explaining that like, well, I had some pains in my tummy, and it was weird to me that like I felt like he didn't really take responsibility for. It was, I don't know, it felt very much like it was a weird sort of exercise in self-justification.
It's interesting though, you seem to have almost connected with it a bit more than you seem to have actually got some. What happened, what I found infuriating about it a little bit was it kind of circled, it felt like oddly enough, a weird early 19th century version of really well-written clickbait, because it kept setting up yes, like you said, I'm going to tell you the highs, the lows, the heavens, the hells. This is it. Roll up, and by the time I finished it, I was, hang on, I don't think I learned one single thing about opium. I don't remember anything. I don't remember him really going into huge detail about how awesome it is.
Or how awful it is. Coming off of it, like,
and I don't know if he actually did it and it somehow bypassed my brain because I found it hard to engage with, or if he didn't actually get round to it. I'm not quite sure.
I feel like he didn't, or then weirdly when he gets to the end and he says like, you basically, I'm going to spare you the grisly details. I'm like, but that's why we're here.
I want grisly details.
That's what the confessions part of Confessions of an Opium Eater was supposed to be. You were supposed to get a window onto the debauched life you had. And
plus, massively disappointed there was no sped up sex scenes and funny trumpet noises, which I demand from a Confessions.
No one blew a bubble out of his arse with a rubber tube.
No one went door to door selling cucumbers. Very disappointing indeed.
So, I mean, basically, to give a very brief overview, pretty much it begins, he tells you, I'm going to tell you all this great stuff, and then he doesn't. Tells you a bit about his childhood, he grows up, he gets pulled out of school for some reason, and then gets
See, I'm
to
amazed you got all of this. I don't remember any of this.
Okay. And then he goes, he kind of wanders around. There's a whole quite maudlin bit, which is also very much like see, I'm a nice guy. I still have great feelings for this girl that I met on the streets who was a hooker, who basically with a heart of gold.
All right, and he lived with her.
Put me under her wing, and she like when I was starving to death, she fed me, and then we lost track of each other. And I've ever to this day I see her on the streets, and you're like, okay, yeah, all right. And then it's kind of like it's not even clear like when does he start. I do love the fact, however, that near the end of the book, when you're reading it for the first time, he gets to this point where he finishes it and tells you like, and I've kicked it. Yes, because this is the end of the original because it was 2 newspaper essays, right? And then there was supposed to be a third and final piece, which, like all great junkie writers, he couldn't fucking be arsed to actually get his shit together and write.
And the whole thing was kind of revised in 1856 as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so the one that I read has this thing where he kind of comes back, he gives you this kind of like this postscript or whatever at the end, this thing where he's like, so you should know that when I said I'd kicked the habit, I in fact had not kicked the habit.
Right.
And it's actually really hard to kick opium.
Don't you know?
Yeah. I knew this. But that was
it's laudanum, isn't it? Which is
yes, yeah. He's taking a lot of drops. I mean, I don't know how much opium is in a drop of laudanum, but it does seem like he had quite a habit going for a while.
I do like the word tincture as well. There's something satisfying about just looking at it.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. The other thing that I thought was actually really interesting, though, because when I was reading, I don't know if it's either in Please Kill Me, the punk book, or it's in one of the Iggy Pop biographies that I read. But Iggy talked about the thing about heroin is it's not just like a really good time if you're into that kind of thing. But he said, like, because it's like it's an absolute painkiller, he said, like you feel nothing but good, right? Like you don't that twinge in your knee, that ache in your back, it's all gone. And I was really interested in that story where he tells quite near the end where he's like, so I'd spent so long basically high on opioids that I could no longer feel or have any sense of the internal workings of my body. And so when he comes off, he's suddenly agonized by the process of peristalsis and digestion. And he feels like every squeeze of his intestine. And I was like, oh shit, man, that's a grim thing to have to be highly conscious of, because he basically said, like, I wasn't conscious of any of my body stuff.
Right.
Is there a ghost off camera or a cat? What's going on?
A cat.
Just off.
Yes, a cat. Okay. Yes.
All right.
It's the ghost's day off.
Okay.
He doesn't haunt on Saturday mornings. He goes and visits his sister at the seaside. Yeah, I've had my fair share of drug experiences. The one I do regret never having tried actually is heroin. I still hope one day I do get to try heroin, because I think I would like it quite a bit.
I'd imagine that's why it has such strong adherence, I guess.
Yes, lots of fans. It's difficult to. I mean, this is a book actually, oddly enough, I've been wanting to read for a very long time. It's probably actually since I saw that Vincent Price film like 20 years ago or something, and even before then, you would have heard of it. And yes, you do kind of think of it as the OG addict memoir, right? So so it is slightly disappointing after all this time to, I mean, I know it seems a bit churlish to kind of criticize it, really, because it is very much of its time. And I suppose it does kind of, even though we've mentioned some of the ways it avoids, I suppose, for what it is and the time it was written, I suppose it does kind of do it. And I can see when this first appeared, I can see it would have been quite the exciting, scandalous read, right? And apparently it was a big influence on people like Balzac.
Right.
Oh, by the way, can I tell since we don't have that much to say about this, tangent, just David Simon, right? Writer of
Yes.
The Wire and other
Yep.
fine television programs, and a good book as well, Homicide. See, I love David Simon because David Simon's that really nice mix, I think, of like the what's the word? Self-taught.
Oh yeah, autodidact.
Yes, he's like the perfect autodidact, you know, kind of working class intellectual, someone who's taught themselves. So I always, obviously I identify with that kind of person. But what else, that kind of person also has a certain kind of sense of humor that bridges the high and the low.
Yes.
And my favorite example of this with David Simon was he was being interviewed. You can find it on YouTube. I can't remember who it is. Someone's interviewing him. And you can tell the interviewer is a little bit slightly takes themselves too serious, kind of head up their own ass, kind of, you know, not a bad business, but David Simon's obviously just, you know, identified this, right?
Right.
And this reviewer was talking about, well, yeah, the thing is with something like The Wire or something like it has this wide over multi-character, very Balzacian, right? And David Simon just looks at him, I mean, you know, he clearly is fucking with him and he just says, did you just call me a ball sack? Which
nice.
I thought was fantastic. But anyway, yeah. So Balzac and Edgar Allan Poe was a fan.
That's not surprising. That's right. I think Poe himself was a friend of Laudanum as well, right? I mean, that's one thing that he does kind of. He quasi outs a variety of poets and politicians and stuff without ever naming them by name, but kind of says like, oh, well, everyone knows that guy's, you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the way it was presented in the version I read, anyway, was they were redacted, but then put back in the footnotes. So and also they mentioned, well, he did say in the original, because I think he originally outed people, and then they took them out.
Right.
But at this point, it's fine because everyone's
who gives a shit? Yeah, it's like 200 years ago.
Yeah, no, but I suppose Poe is an interesting comparison point as well. I know it's like a little bit later on, but Poe is one of those authors of this era. The work survives because of the writing, right?
Yes.
And whereas this is, like we said, every now and again it did wrap itself around our brains and it did take us on a little, but then for whatever reason, and it's the reason I think it's difficult to talk about, for me at least, is it's difficult for me to identify exactly why the language not fails, because I almost feel it's my failure as much as the original writing. But I'm just I can't figure out why suddenly the connection is made and then it's got, like, I don't get why. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't articulate. So it's lucky I have a YouTube series that demands articulation.
Yeah.
I'm talking about. But do you know what I mean? I can't tell you why. I can only be honest about my experience with it. And it doesn't matter how much you like, because we talked about this before, every now and again, if you feel that happening towards the beginning of the book and you know you have to read it, you're like, okay, come on, man up, focus, but it doesn't work. It just doesn't.
No,
you can't force yourself to forge that link. But what that's all about, or maybe someone cleverer than me can explain why, but I don't. But that is my experience with it, and it sounds as if you had a similar experience.
Yeah. So two things that struck me about like reading a little bit about him. One is that like he was very right wing, which is interesting because this is the first, like, you know, I was thinking like this is going to be early Hunter S. Thompson. This is going to be this guy, you know, just putting it all out there and so on, wild and woolly and crazy. But as I said, it turns out like there's an extended part of the end where he just goes into this like racist tirade about his terror dreams of, like, you know, the Orient and stuff, which was like, this is all very strange. Did he spend any time there? Like, why is he so worried about that?
You say that though, but then again, Hunter S. Thompson is a good example of he part of his politics, though, is this extreme kind of like
individualism, I suppose.
and that can
Yes.
easily go
Oh yeah,
clear off
yeah.
to the right as well. So I
Agreed.
wouldn't have been that if Hunter Thompson had lived longer into his dotage. I wouldn't have been surprised.
Oh yeah, if we'd seen him voting for Trump.
Like recently, was it the Dukes of Hazzard guy put up the post somewhere calling for the public hanging of Joe Biden, right? Like that's something I wouldn't be amazing.
Although that guy did drive around in a car with the Confederate flag on it.
Yes. But you know what I mean? So, you wouldn't be that shocked to see a 95-year-old Hunter Thompson saying something like, well, you know, Trump actually has got some great ideas.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It would be very depressing given that he had written that excoriating book about Nixon.
But I wouldn't be, that wouldn't shock me.
No. Much. But Quincy wasn't just worried about. He also had no time for the Irish and for Irish home rule and all that stuff too. So naturally, that immediately irks me slightly. Hey, junkie, get off your fucking high horse. But there was that. Shit, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, no. But the other thing that was interesting was I had forgotten. It was only like very vague thing that I. But anyway, he wrote the stuff that becomes Suspiria and
yes.
Argento's Mother of the Tears,
yes,
trilogy or whatever, right? Inferno, and that was like I was like, oh yeah, you know what? I wouldn't mind actually reading something that wasn't this, but maybe his later work is more interesting. Maybe
I've got the same plan because I've been planning to read the whatever the full title is, Suspiria something.
Suspiria de Profundis.
Yes, I've been planning to read that for years as well, but now I feel why not? Because as a companion piece, and then to see what I make of DeQuincey in general. And I don't think I think the links are tenuous, right? I don't think the act of reading Suspiria is going to be like, wow, this is just like an Argento film.
Right. Yeah, no, I highly doubt it. And nor do I think I will be suddenly. Now I understand what's happening in Inferno. Finally.
Right.
That's why that guy went into that room and went underwater and what the fuck.
And now, now Mother of Tears is a great film. No, that's
exactly
not a thing anytime soon.
I think that you have to take 500 drops of laudanum for that to be the case.
Right. In which case, you might enjoy the praying mantis in Dracula. Although actually, I did enjoy that. That's the only bit of that film I did enjoy.
So, shall we move on then to a book that I have to say, or an essay, a 46-page essay. I did read about half of the follow-up, Heaven and Hell. I don't know if you read any of that, and I intend to finish it. It's only because I just didn't finish it, but I was weirdly enjoying it too, although it's not quite as funny. I don't know if Doors of Perception is intended to be funny, but I found myself not laughing, but I just generally enjoying the kind of
I didn't factor in that because I didn't realize that the Heaven and Hell part of it until I finished reading Doors of Perception. So I hadn't factored in the time necessary to read that as well. So
it's longer.
I'm the same with you. I haven't finished Heaven and Hell. I only just started it, but that's okay. I think we can. Get on with it. Sure. Doors of Perception then. 1952, 3, something like that.
Yeah, let me bring it up here. 54, yes. So in May 1953, Huxley basically took a trip, and it sounds like it was one of his first.
You make it sound like he just went to the seaside.
Yeah. It's a great time.
Yes.
He got the idea from
hours contemplating a bucket and spade.
Although that doesn't seem that far outside of what might have happened had he gone to the beach.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
On mescaline. So basically, he takes mescaline and then sits around for hours and has this.
Looks at his trousers.
Yeah, spends an awful lot of time looking at his trousers. He spends quite a bit of time looking at a chair.
Yeah. And then goes to the world's biggest drugstore.
Yeah.
And looks at some art books. And I tell you what surprised me though, before we get into that, in the preliminary kind of introduction, quite interesting to find out that adrenochrome is actually a thing.
Yes.
It's just you can't buy it in a bottle and take it in Las Vegas, right? But it is, was it something to do with the adrenaline decaying in your bloodstream? Makes this thing called adrenaline. So actually, we probably all weirdly, because I think that's the thing from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is first time everyone read that was like, shit, I got to get some adrenochrome, and then finding out, oh, it doesn't exist, and then you find out not only does it exist, we probably all actually have experienced
in our bodies at some time.
So that was interesting. That was a bit of a head spin to find that out. Did you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
No, and I'm assuming that that's exactly where it comes from. Because I mean,
yeah,
Hunter
I'm
Thompson
he read this.
Had read, if I had read both of these books.
Yeah.
Because he refers to DeQuincey and Huxley in his own writing. So,
right.
And also Sigmund Freud's The Cocaine Papers or whatever it was that because Siggy went through a phase of like doing a lot of nose candy. And recording his experiences. But
always a good cover for a drug addiction, isn't it?
Yes, I'm doing a study.
Yes, exactly. When someone as straight-laced as Aldous Huxley, right?
Yeah, that's what's so wonderful about.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. That is the juxtaposition. Because I always think of. Do I have it here? There's a picture of Aldous Huxley on the back cover of the edition of The Devils of Loudun that I've got, and he's the look on his face. He kind of looks like super focused and serious. Like he's the most serious look. Like he's the embodiment of the kind of intellectual, right? Like very, you know, because some of his writings are almost sterile to a fault, right? In a way. Right. But here, that combination of that and basically, but his language is a satisfying time.
Oh yeah. No, it's I read it. As I said, of the two, if I had to recommend one, I would strongly recommend reading this. You know, certainly over DeQuincey's book. It's funny too. It reminded me of this. There was this old, you know who Robert Smigel is?
Robert Smigel?
Yeah. Robert Smigel was a writer for, he was a head writer, I think, for Conan O'Brien for a while. He was a writer on Saturday Night Live, but he invented that fucking talking insult comic puppet dog.
Oh yes, I know what that is. Yeah,
that's him, and voiced him. But he had done this series of little cartoons for like back in the 90s for Saturday Night Live, and they were often the best part of any given episode of Saturday Night Live. Were these little, and they were always animated in a kind of a 1980s looking style or 1970s looking style. So there was one that was like Ace and Gary, the ambiguously gay duo, and obviously it was a bunch of just, you know, jokes about how ambiguously gay they were. There was one of my favorites. It was the Mr. They had redone the Mr. T cartoon, but it was like set then. So he still had these kids with him, but like he was unemployed and kind of like homeless now, and just wandering around with these white kids in tow. It was very strange. So the best thing
in Saturday Night Live is very much a backhanded comment, but
that's true. Yes, I mean the bar is not high. That's low hanging fruit, for sure. But the one I really liked was it was just called The Immigrant, the Baby, and the Guy in Mushrooms. And it was the three of them wandering around in wide-eyed wonder at everything they see. You know, like the baby because it's a baby and it's seeing it for the first time. The Guy in Mushrooms because he's high as a kite, and the immigrant because he's just babbling incoherently in made-up immigrant language in excitement over whatever's going on. And somehow that came to mind when I was like, just the complete joy with which he starts to just look at shit that's totally commonplace.
The immigrant, the baby, the man of mushrooms, and the intellectual with nice trousers on mescaline.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do want to see. I mean, he might just have had really nice trousers. Like, might not even have needed mescaline. You might have, wow, look at those trousers. Like, who knows? He might have been famous as the man around town with the awesome trousers.
I did have to ask, have you ever had, so he does describe these kind of like, these stages of like kind of hallucinatory imagery that you might see.
Right.
So things like just weird like marching people and all this kind of stuff, or just this strange kind of. Have you ever experienced that kind of like waking or with your eyes closed kind of that kind of imagery?
Well, it was interesting because that's something he nails quite well, is that I've never tried peyote or mescaline, I have to say, but I have had hallucinogens, and it is interesting. There's lots of different stages, but there's two distinct types of trip that I'm familiar with. One which is full on actually seeing things, hallucination that feel tangible and in my experience that was more rare, because as well the other thing you have to consider, I was more or less taking street drugs, right? Things that would come along, or when it came to acid or magic mushrooms, right? And so it's very difficult to, you're not quite sure what you're going to get.
Right.
You just
if you're going to live through the experience.
Yeah, you just ingest whatever's given you, right? But then more common would be, rather than a full-on hallucination, it's kind of difficult to explain, although he does a good job of it actually putting into words, is the suggestion of something else being there. So you're not seeing it, but somehow normal things around you conjure up. It's almost like when you see like you know, like when you see like schematics written on like plastic and you can layer it over something, a bit like that. So you look at something and you just get the ghost of a kind of. So I remember, loads of things just and that's enough, because it just sends your brain off on all these interesting. I mean, a good example again. This isn't something you could see and it wasn't tangible, but conceptually it was so weird. So I remember being at this house party, because you got a lot of you got a lot of old hippies kind of go and retire in the Welsh countryside, right? And young people would always find out where their parties were. So I remember going to this house in the middle country run by some hippies, and I'd already taken some acid before I'd gone. And then it turned out when we turned up, our hippie hosts were handing out little bushels of dried magic mushrooms that they'd picked. So we're like, oh, okay. So, and I remember it was like an old farmhouse, and like they built an extension, like a kitchen like a cloakroom. So you had, like a front door and a back door, right? Like a farmhouse kind of, like a little. And I remember going out the front door to the garden for a piss, and then coming round the other side, coming in through the back door and seeing myself leave. And I was like, oh, either I've gone back in time,
right,
or I'm now stretched around the outside of the house temporarily like a slinky or something.
Right.
So, but again, that wasn't something like that. It was just a concept or a notion. So, for example, like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Like when I first saw like Robert Crumb and some of the other people who did like Zap comics, some of that, particularly that very densely, like where there's like hundreds of characters all kind of overlapping, like doing stuff or all marching in the same order, whatever. I remember being like, oh, that's really cool. That's really intricate drawing and stuff, but not necessarily getting the thing like, oh, like this might be trying to, this is trying to replicate something that they have seen while high, right? And then bizarrely, I a couple of years ago was prescribed blood pressure medication. And the first night I took it, I went to bed and I lay down, I closed my eyes, and I got this mostly black and white set of just bizarre images of like, cityscapes rising and like marching armies of like in lockstep together. And I was like, what the fuck? This is like 5 milligrams of blood pressure meds. Like, should I be seeing stuff? Like, and obviously if I opened my eyes, it wasn't exactly there. Maybe just kind of, maybe it was in the way that when you stare into the light and blink, you get those kind of traces, right?
This doctor that you go to, is he a long-haired fellow who lives in a caravan?
Come to think of it, yes, 40 coats. 40 coats in his 50 pockets full of drugs. But no, yeah, no. Anyway, that was weird, and it happened then. It happened like the first 2 nights, and then it went away, and blood pressure meds, and didn't. But I could feel it, like I could feel it working in my body. It was a very strange thing. The first time I took it, it was like it was a kind of a
Well,
it was odd. Anyway,
I remember as a carry on. Sorry.
no, I said actually I went off them for a while during COVID because I just couldn't get to a doctor.
Off your meds.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then I went back on them.
That's when that massacre happened, wasn't it? In the
that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. So then so I went back on them, and the first night I went back on them, it was back again because obviously my body was like, it was like, oh, this thing again. I was like, holy shit, I don't think you should be getting visual hallucinations from taking. Anyway, so yeah, who knows what's gonna happen if I try anything more.
He's on the roids. He's on the roids. I like the line that his paranoia is absurd. Are you thinking about my bird? But I remember one of my earliest experience as a young child of altered states, I guess, was something that I got addicted to doing for a short time, and until I was told, yeah, don't do that because it's not good for you. Was
your brain?
Well, yeah. What I discovered what was really cool was I'd close my eyes, and then if I'd like squeeze my eyeballs like that, you'd get all these weird fucking.
Oh yes, psychedelic.
Shit. Yeah, and I could do that for hours.
I think we all used
to until a wise grown up discovered you basically
going to make yourself blind.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, later on you'll find other ways to do that.
Oh yeah. I do also. Well, I remember getting that from doing things that I thought were like not intentionally, but because as a nerd, I spent a lot of time as an artist.
DeQuincey's kind of self-justification, Nick.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. As a kid, I spent a lot of time in my bedroom, like involved with art supplies and art materials. And one thing I discovered was aerosol fixative, which is basically a spray, a very toxic spray chemical that allows you to, like, if you do a chalk pastel drawing or like a charcoal drawing, you can spray this over the top of it, and it will fix it so that when you put your hand on it, it's not going to completely smear off. But it interacts with polystyrene or styrofoam to folks in North America by melting holes in it. And so I was building these like space forts and then making laser holes in them by spraying them with the stuff. And I'm imagining the fucking fumes coming off of this in my enclosed bedroom, because I would come out and I would be like, my mom would be like, are you all right there? Can I be like,
are you doing chalk drawings again?
There again, young man.
That was your chalk period that lasted many, many, many years.
It did.
Oddly enough, you never actually had any.
Yeah, moved out of that.
No.
Yeah, well, the brain damage was quite severe. There was that, and then the other thing that I used to do was because again, things that were okay in the 80s was I would make lead figures with these. So I'd buy these rubber molds from Hopkins, which is this shop in town, and come home and buy lead bars and cook them in a frying pan on the stove in my mom's kitchen. Yes.
While the whole time already being high off squash as well.
Exactly.
No wonder we all grew up fucked up. That's why train spotting happened, right? Is that we're just fed drugs from an early age in some form or another.
Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and actually, having read on and reading the next thing, it's really interesting because he kind of goes into this whole idea of like how the arts attempt to get you there. He also uses this extended metaphor over and over again, which is really, really, I don't know if you've gotten to that part. It's really funny about basically this place, like in the mind or wherever, this place that you have access to when you take mescaline or other kind of those psychotropic drugs, is like the antipodes of the mind. It's the Australia of the mind. And he says, like,
heaven and hell, is it?
Yeah, this is in heaven and hell. Yeah.
Okay.
But he keeps coming back to this idea. And at one point, he's like, and like you just have to accept that there are such a thing as kangaroos, like no matter how fucking ridiculous that seems to be.
Right. I think he does mention something along those lines in Doors of Perception as well. Something about kangaroos, I remember. But it's interesting because what I appreciate about his thought as well is like he's always he's a smart cookie, obviously, that all this awesome trousers Huxley. And so, like, before anyone else has a chance to like derail, like he you know, he has the godhead moment or whatever, right? But then he's like, no, I'm no fool. I do realize that I'm not really accessing any profound wisdom, or this, you know, this isn't a religious. However, at the same time, there is value in basically just almost experience anything that might suggest anything larger than yourself. And it's true that I remember reading an interview with Dean Stockwell, and he was just saying something about, you know what, I took shitloads of drugs when I was younger, and I'm really glad I did, because it just gives you a platform. It just opens things up, and it just gives you a chance to see the possibilities, and that there's different ways of looking. You know, it doesn't have to be that you learn one like specific thing or anything like that. And
Right.
definitely in my experience, I'm so pleased I got high a lot when I was younger, because it just, I don't know, it just immediately puts you in a slightly different category of people who haven't had those kind of experiences, just because you're just aware that that's there. You're just aware that at the touch of a button, you can see this huge panoramic view of life and the world, and something which I think is difficult to get to. You can get there other ways, but it's like a fast track to that, right?
One thing that I thought was interesting was the way he kind of talks about this idea of, like, you know, alcohol does this in one way, but like it's you know, it doesn't. What was fascinating was this idea that it just reduces your like will to just like be aggressive in the world, and to want to change things and do things, and like, you know, and instead you just want to experience things and
Yes.
look at things and be
Yes.
really like, oh shit, look at that piece of sea glass refracting that light, you know, and just
Which,
enjoy
like
that.
everything is great if everyone's doing it, because then you have no problems, right? If everyone's
Well,
just,
yeah,
that'll be fine. But of course, while you're doing that, some motherfuckers plotting over here, and unfortunately, we have to be vigilant against that kind of thing. So that's
right.
always what's fucking it up, is these motherfuckers, right? Is
Yeah,
otherwise
so
we'd all just be enjoying tripping balls, and yeah. But no, you've got you've got your little fuckers everywhere, unfortunately, right? Always have.
yeah. But and the other thing that's fascinating to me, and also kind of terrifying, is this concept of like taking so much of these things that you experience ego death, where you literally no longer understand yourself as separate from everything else, and you're just you do hear stories of people who just never quite come back
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
that.
Sid Barrett, for example, is a
Well,
classic.
Sid
Yeah.
immediately springs to mind. Yes.
The nearest I've had, I didn't come anywhere near that, but the nearest experience to that in a physical sense that actually the last time I ever took acid, after the Glastonbury Festival, when we stayed behind to do the cleanup, you can get paid to clean up the fields and stuff. And someone found some acid that someone had left behind, like because a lot of people just abandon stuff, especially they were both really rainy Glastonburys, rainy muddy Glastonburys.
Right.
A lot of, like, you know, people from the cities who don't understand our country ways, they fuck off, you know. They're like, oh, we saw whoever on the main stage last night, let's fuck off, you know. And they just, drug dealers would just leave stashes behind, you know. You'd find tents with so yeah, we found some acid, and I remember taking it, and it wasn't a particularly strong trip, but I'd had acid a few times at that point. I remember lying in a tent next to my friend, and I was so aware of all of my bodily functions. Like I could feel my blood pumping, and my pancreas doing whatever the fuck my pancreas does, my liver.
So this is the opposite then of that opioid thing we just talked
Everything was
about.
just, yeah, there was no pain. It's just everything was gurgling, and
Right.
and then as a consequence, I could feel, rather than being a contained individual, I could feel me bleeding out into the surroundings and thinking, oh yeah, this is the earth and this is the, yeah. But so some people might think, oh, groovy, man, that's cool. But at this point, after having, so I just felt like really like yeah, I couldn't pull myself together. I was just like a cow pack.
Meat sack.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was a meat urinal. And for all you Tokyo Hut fans.
Mm,
Yeah, so it was just, yeah, it was not much fun because you couldn't bring yourself together to do anything, or because you just everything
right.
you did, you just felt things like blah, 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 you know,
Starfish
very
like an
sloppy.
invertebrate.
Yeah, so
Wow.
I just try, and of course you can't sleep when you're on acid, really. So I just had to wait for it to go away.
So one thing I did Google actually when I was reading the second Heaven and Hell, because he really goes into basically how different artists and different religious movements have attempted basically to replicate this experience like visually or in some other way so that people don't have to do drugs to get there
Mm,
because, so he describes, for example, he's like this, he says one specific, and he named the artist. I looked him up, don't know what it is now, but I'll go
mm.
back again and check. But he named this artist. He's like, this stained glass window in this church in Italy is basically like one of the high moments of like psychedelic mescaline kind of art. Like you can go and stare at this window and you'll get a feeling of this Australia of the mind, this whatever the fuck it is, this place that's outside of yourself and beyond yourself and beyond time. And
Wow. You'd think in a few years later, fucking Aldous would have soiled his beautiful trousers when introduced to Zap comics, right? He'd be, oh,
yeah. um
Captain Piscums. But we should mention the one thing we overlooked, actually, which we should bring up, of course, is that both these books, of course, and a huge influence on this is William Blake, of course.
yes,
Who,
yes,
as far as I know,
absolutely.
didn't require any drugs of any sort because he was
No, I
clearly
think he was wired different.
he was off his nut, is what he was. But in a brilliant way. I'm a big fan of
Oh
Blake.
yeah,
Yeah.
Blake is fantastic as a visual artist and as a writer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, his stuff is just pure, straight from whatever place in the back brain that he had that shit. Yeah,
Yeah. I have a lot of time. He's one of the few kind of, in a way, because he was, no doubt he was, in a way, a religious zealot. He's one of the few religious zealots that I've got time for, if you see what I mean.
yeah, but he's like a religious zealot in the same way that like Henry Darger was like really into little girls. Have you ever seen any of Darger's art? They actually had
Yeah.
an amazing.
I do have a stash in the cupboard. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. There was an amazing exhibition of his in Tokyo while I was there. Like it was probably the biggest Darger exhibit ever, and it was insane to just see that amount of work come out of one guy whose job was like janitor or whatever it was. Like he would just go home at the end of the day, no life outside of creating this like endless mythic madness. Yeah.
Well, he's the classic example of the we've spoken
Outsider
before. Yeah, well, also is we still haven't actually discovered the greatest novel ever written because there's a man in a shed somewhere still writing,
yes,
right?
yes,
And he might just, or she might just die, and then we never
yes,
get to see it, right?
yeah.
I suppose the nearest we get to that is Philip K. Dick's Exegesis or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, he was already
Again,
famous before becoming the crazy man in the shed, but so
yes,
that's why
yeah.
we know of. If he wasn't famous already, there's no way we would know
That
about.
wouldn't have been his breakthrough work, I
No,
don't think.
no. You got to read this Exegesis, guys. But yeah, so yeah, Doors of Perception, worth a bit of a read. Again, some of the, even though it's dated, because I think when Aldous Huxley was writing some of this, obviously, like a lot of exciting new concepts and ideas and ways of looking at the world, they became so assimilated by
Yes. They're so
that
woven
no
into the
longer
fabric of
seems
culture.
necessarily, oh my God, I'd never thought of it like that before. Like, because, well, we have thought of it before because it's
Right.
70 years later, right?
Right.
But you do get the glimmer when something's, well written in the first place. You still get that glimmer of what it would have been like to read this when new, or
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I found it lots of fun. It was good food for thought. And as I said, I'm really enjoying reading the second essay.
Yeah,
which
I'll
is
finish
long.
with Heaven and Hell definitely as well. Also, quite so a little aside, but I was kind of quite surprised at how late on. I think it's 1890 something, or they mention like basically, you know, Europeans getting their heads wrapped around the properties of cacti, right?
Yes.
Quite late in the game. I would have assumed it was a bit earlier than that, but no, it almost into the 20th century. We're discovering, you know, cactuses, and the fact that other indigenous populations have been like, dude, this stuff is awesome. Like, for some reason, I thought that would have been, I don't know, at least a century earlier or something, but apparently not. Although, who knows, there might have been some fur trappers or mountain men who
Yes, some conquistador who never came back from that first trip.
Yeah,
to
still tripping to this day.
Yeah.
In that heavy armor.
the big hat.
I'm imagining Klaus Kinski on a raft covered in monkeys, right?
Yeah, just fucked up.
Yeah, yeah. So there we go.
Yep.
That's our next podcast series we're starting, where we take fucked up as feck.
Yes,
where we just take loads of different drugs. Actually, that is not a bad idea. Right. Shall we finish up?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, nice little to read these together, I think was kind of interesting. Again, DeQuincey, yeah, I mean, difficult to recommend, but also difficult to you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell you not to read it.
No, because that would seem
I think
strange.
It has more novelty, I suppose, because it's the first of its type in English anyway.
I'm wondering if there might be, because I have to admit, I read like a bog standard, you know, $1 Kindle.
Yes, me too.
I'm wondering if there might be a nice annotated edition,
right?
That would make the whole experience more interesting. Like,
yeah, maybe St. Joshi, whatever his name is, has put together one.
Yeah, actually, I don't know why I hadn't thought of that. That probably would have been a better. There probably is like a Penguins edition with lots of footnotes and context and introductions, and in which case I think I would consider reading it again, because it would almost like be reading a new book, right?
Right. I'm going to watch the movie anyway. That's my
yes, which has almost fuck all to do with the
book.
Great. But it's good fun. It's good fun. Okay then.
Right, with that.
Yeah, off we go.